Bedtime Stories. Who lives in a pineapple under the sea? SpongeBob SquarePants. Absorbent and yellow and porous is he. SpongeBob SquarePants. If nautical nonsense be something you wish, SpongeBob SquarePants. Then drop on the deck and flop like a fish. SpongeBob SquarePants. SpongeBob SquarePants. SpongeBob SquarePants. SpongeBob SquarePants. SpongeBob SquarePants. It's just about bedtime in Bikini Bottom. Our favorite porous pal SpongeBob SquarePants has brushed his teeth and is ready to go to sleep. But first, he decides he needs to read a bedtime story. Or 2, or 3, or 4. That is, if he can stay awake long enough. Goldie Sponge and the Three Crabs. Once upon a time, in a cozy cottage deep down at the bottom of the sea, there lived a family of crabs. A father crab, a mother crab, and a baby crab. One fine morning, the crabs sat down to their daily breakfast of jellyfish jelly on toast. The father crab looked at his plate and said, "My jelly is too thick and sticky." "Well, let's all go for a morning crawl while our jelly thins," said the mother crab. So off the three crabs crawled. Just a few moments after the crab family left, guess who appeared? A very hungry and a very nosy visitor named Goldie Sponge. "I am ever so hungry and ever so nosy," said Goldie Sponge. "Perhaps I'll look inside this quaint little cottage and see what I can see." Spotting the breakfast of toast and jellyfish jelly on the table, Goldie Sponge decided to help himself. First, he tried the father crab's toast. "Yuck!" cried Goldie Sponge. "That is too sticky." Next, he tried the mother crab's toast. "Ew!" whined Goldie Sponge. "This jelly is too thin and runny." Finally, Goldie Sponge took a nibble of the baby crab's toast and jellyfish jelly. He gushed. "This is just right." In fact, this toast and jelly was so good that Goldie Sponge gobbled up every last crumb. His spongy belly full of toast and jelly, Goldie Sponge needed to sit for a spell. First, he sat down in the father crab's chair. "Ouch!" Goldie Sponge cried. "This chair is ever so hard." Next, he sat on the mother crab's chair. "Oof!" he said. "This chair is much too soft." Finally, he plopped onto the baby crab's chair. This chair felt just right. Until it broke. His bottom sore from the fall to the floor, Goldie Sponge needed a rest. He settled onto the father crab's bed, but quickly said, "This bed is so hard." Next, he lay down on the mother crab's bed, but soon said, "This bed is way too soft." Finally, he crawled into the baby crab's bed. This bed was perfect, and soon Goldie Sponge was fast asleep. Just about that time, the three crabs returned from their morning crawl. They found that someone had been eating their toast. They also found that someone had been sitting in their chairs. Then they found that someone had been sleeping in their beds, and that someone was still sleeping in the baby crab's bed. That someone, Goldie Sponge, awoke to find three confused crabs staring at him, but he didn't stick around for too long. Who snoops in places that aren't his own, who gobbles up other folks' jelly and toast, who sits in a chair till it falls to the floor, who lies in your bed, who snoozes and snores, SpongeBob SquarePants, SpongeBob SquarePants, SpongeBob SquarePants, SpongeBob SquarePants. "That was a good story," a sleeping SpongeBob snored to himself. "I think I'll dream another one." Rumpelstilt Sponge. One day, Squidward was the only one working at the Krusty Krab, Bikini Bottom's favorite restaurant. That meant he had to be both the cashier and the fry cook, a job that he did not like to do. The place was full of hungry customers while Mr. Krabs said, "Squidward, these customers aren't going to feed themselves. You had better fill the whole kitchen with fresh Krabby Patties." "Woe is me," complained Squidward, feeling especially sorry for himself. "How will I ever make that many Krabby Patties?" Just then, a strange little sponge appeared in the kitchen. "I'll make your Krabby Patties," said the strange little sponge, "if you give me your clarinet in return." Squidward agreed to the deal. "Anything to keep me from having to make a kitchen full of Krabby Patties," he thought. While the strange little sponge got to work, Squidward sneaked in a little clarinet practice. Somewhere between Super and Bram, Squidward dozed off. When he awoke, the kitchen was full of freshly cooked Krabby Patties, and the strange little sponge was demanding his payment. Squidward did not want to give up his precious clarinet, so the strange little sponge made him a deal. "If you can guess my name," said the strange little sponge, "I will let you keep your clarinet." Squidward reached into his hat full of names, a handy thing to have around, and began to guess. "Sponge Drew? Sponge Bert? Christoph Sponge? Sponge Ald?" he guessed. "Sponge Jean? Sponge Rick? Sponge Bald? Sponge Hilda?" But with each guess, the sponge shook his head. Finally, Squidward pulled out one last name from his hat and read it aloud. "Rumpelstilt Sponge." He knew he was right as a strange little sponge named Rumpelstilt Sponge fumed and fussed and tried to stomp his way out of the kitchen, stubbing his toe in the process, leaving behind Squidward's beloved clarinet. "Who appears just in time to save Squidward's skin? Who makes enough food to fill the kitchen? Who wants to take Squidward's dear clarinet? Who gets grumpy when his name is guessed? Rumpelstilt Sponge, Rumpelstilt Sponge, Rumpelstilt Sponge, Rumpelstilt Sponge." "What a crazy story," snoozed SpongeBob. "Perhaps I'll dream another." Sponge Jack and the Kelp Stalk. One day, Sponge Jack called, "Mr. Krabs, we're all out of Krabby Patty buns." This is news that Mr. Krabs, the owner of the Krusty Krab, did not want to hear, but he handed Sponge Jack a crisp dollar bill. "Sponge Jack," said Mr. Krabs, "I'm trusting you with this whole dollar. You must promise that you will not spend it on anything other than buns." A short time later, Sponge Jack returned, but he hadn't bought more Krabby Patty buns. Instead, he used Mr. Krabs' dollar bill to buy a magic bean. Mr. Krabs was so angry that he knocked the bean right out of Sponge Jack's hand and right out of the window. Sometime that night, the magic bean began to grow. It grew and it grew, becoming a giant kelp stalk that rose from the ocean floor. The next morning, as he walked to work, Sponge Jack ran smack dab into the kelp stalk. "Ouch! This thing wasn't here yesterday," he said. "Maybe I should climb it and see where it goes." Once Sponge Jack reached the top of the kelp stalk, he was in for a rather spooky surprise. There, above him, floated the ghost ship owned by that dreaded ghost pirate, the Flying Dutchman. But Sponge Jack, being the clever fellow that he was, decided that all naught was lost. "I'll take the Flying Dutchman's dining sock, the special sock that he uses to eat his dinner," he thought to himself. "I'll give it to Mr. Krabs in order to cheer him up. He'll forget all about that silly magic bean." Of course, the Flying Dutchman did not like this idea. He chased Sponge Jack from the ship and down the kelp stalk. "Arg!" yelled the pirate. "Come back with my dining sock, you footwear-filching fiend!" But Sponge Jack was much too quick and made it down the kelp stalk before he could be caught, dining sock and all. Who bought a magic bean, and Mr. Krabs wept, whose bean grew and grew while he slept, who found a ghost ship on top of a kelp stalk, who bought Mr. Krabs a ghost pirate sock. SpongeBob SquarePants, SpongeBob SquarePants, SpongeBob SquarePants, SpongeBob SquarePants. "That was another splendid story," sighed a sleeping SpongeBob. I think I have time to dream one more. Squidward's new clothes. It was a big night for Squidward. He had tickets to hear the famous clarinet concert by Wolfgang Amadeus Tentacles. Now all he needed were some spiffy new duds for his night out on the town. As Squidward worried about what to wear, he heard a knock at his door. "I'll make the finest, fanciest suit for you to wear," said the visitor. "This suit will be so fine and fancy that anyone who is foolish will not be able to see it." Squidward thought about all of the foolish folks he knew and agreed to buy the suit. The visitor set to work right away. He measured Squidward from head to tentacle. He even measured Squidward's nose. The man sewed and sewed. All the while Squidward posed and posed, trying on pieces of a suit that no one could see. "This suit is divine!" squealed Squidward. "Now I had better get to the concert." He was so proud of his fancy new suit that he started his stuff in front of the crowd. Although nobody in the crowd could see the suit, everyone was afraid to admit it for fear of looking foolish. But one wee lad had the courage to say what he saw. The lad asked Squidward, "Why aren't you wearing any clothes?" Horrified, Squidward tried to cover himself up, all the while looking for that scheming man who was long gone. Who had tickets to a fancy show? Who had nothing to wear? Could he go? Who said to dear Squidward, "You've got nothing on"? But was too late to catch the crook who was gone. SpongeBob SquarePants, SpongeBob SquarePants, SpongeBob SquarePants, SpongeBob SquarePants. Who tried to read 4 books before bed, who fell asleep and dreamed them instead, who is snoring now that he's asleep, who's cuddled up in a sleep that's so deep. SpongeBob SquarePants, SpongeBob SquarePants, SpongeBob SquarePants, SpongeBob SquarePants. The end.